Welcome to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. My name is Andrew Garrison, and this is a show where we talk about sports in the state of Indiana. It is a restful day to be a fan of sports in the state of Indiana. It is, of course, the NBA All-Star break. Today is Monday, February 17th. It's just the early afternoon. Today, the NBA All-Star game was, or I suppose the NBA All-Star tournament was yesterday. Pascal Siakam participated in that. We'll talk a little bit about the NBA All-Star Game later on in the show. Obviously, it's not an Indiana-focused event, and the NBA All-Star Game hasn't really been all that notable in recent years, and that continues this year in its own way. But we've got a lot to talk about today. We're going to open with the Indiana Pacers. We're going to check in on the Indiana Pacers at the All-Star break. Where are they? What are we looking ahead to for the rest of the year? What's their ceiling? What's their floor? What are our opinions maybe on the pre-All-Star break season so far for the Pacers? We're going to talk about Purdue. We're going to talk about how concerned we maybe are about their men's basketball performance. They've lost 2 in a row. They're in position to lose 3 in a row for the first time this season. They go to number 11, Michigan State. At least they're number 11 right now. The AP poll will come out very soon. We'll see sort of how that goes. In position to lose 3 in a row on the road against a top 15 for sure, probably, team in the country. We'll talk about IU, some bright spots. What can we take away from IU that we like what we see, things of that nature. And then we're going to transition over to the Colts, some offseason teams. Myles Garrett, could he be on the Indianapolis Colts next season? How they could make that happen? What maybe the pros and cons of that situation would be as well. And then we're going to talk about the NBA All-Star Game. We're going to talk about Aaron Rodgers, some possible landing spots for him. Is he going to continue playing? And then we'll recap the rest of the week that we've missed perhaps so far and look ahead to the next couple days and the next episode. But I want to start with the Indiana Pacers. Of course, the most notable team in Indiana right now that's playing is the only professional team truly that's playing right now in the Indiana Pacers. Let's check in on where they are at the All-Star break. Obviously, they wrap up their pre-All-Star session, I suppose, with that overtime win on the road against the Washington Wizards. And then they come into the All-Star break. Pascal Siakam goes off to play. The rest of them hang back for the most part. And now we're looking at a situation where on Thursday, the Pacers return to play at home against the Grizzlies. And I want to sort of look at what they've done so far, what they have left to prove, and what their ceiling and floor is in the regular season and postseason moving forward. First of all, of course, congratulations to Pascal Siakam. He had some good moments in the All-Star game, despite the All-Star game having not very many good moments as a whole across the board. But he had 4 points. He had that moment where he, I believe, had 2, and then steal, turnover, got the ball back, 2-on-1 situation, gave the ball to Trae Young. He scored. So led to some points there in the first game. His team, of course, won the first game and then lost the second. Not a huge deal, but I enjoyed watching Pascal Siakam. Of course, Zach Edey, Trace Jackson Davis were in there as well. So the question for me right now is, how do we feel right now about the Indiana Pacers? They are 30-23. They're number 4 in the East, 5.5 games behind the 3 seed in the New York Knicks, and 1 game above the Milwaukee Bucks at the 5 spot. They are also notably only 2 games above Detroit. So there's sort of a drop-off. We're seeing a clear 3 in the Cavs, the Celtics, and the Knicks at the top of the Eastern Conference. There's a slight drop-off, and then you have the Pacers and the Bucks and the Pistons and maybe the Heat. And the Pacers are at the top of that next best category, which is, I wouldn't say similar to what we saw last season, but it is similar in the sense that the Pacers were close to the top of that rest of the best category, where you had your, at least in the eyes of some people, the true contenders at the top with the Knicks and the Celtics and whoever else you want to put in that category. And then you kind of had a middle-of-the-pack playoff team range. The Pacers were in there. They got hot at the end of the year, ended up taking themselves all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. Right now, again, they find themselves at the top of that best of the rest heat, perhaps 5.5 games behind the 3 seed in the New York Knicks. They're 14-8 in home games. They're 15-14 on the road. But in the last 10 games, the Pacers have been 6-4. Last 5, 2-3. Last 3, 1-2. Their last game, of course, is that overtime win on the road against one of the worst teams in the league in terms of record, in the Washington Wizards after the Kyle Kuzma, Chris Middleton trade. And then they lost to the Knicks and the Lakers, 2 playoff teams, and I would say bona fide championship contenders in their own right just before that. So let's talk about the recent results, but I want to, before that, get to the progression of the season as a whole, because the Pacers really did start slow, and it's not a secret. Everybody pretty much understands that the Pacers started slow in October. They had a rough start. They started 2-3. They were 1-2 in 3 consecutive one-possession games. There were some litmus tests early on, because the question was whether or not the Pacers, because they really did bring back everyone, and they really did have all the pieces and even more with Benedict Mathurin, of course, returning, and Tyrese Halliburton being fully healthy. They had all the pieces that they had in that Eastern Conference Finals run before. And the question was early on in October, they're going to play the Knicks on the road and they're going to play the Celtics on home. That's a fantastic litmus test to see how the Pacers stack up against the East. And they got blown away by the Knicks right away in Madison Square Garden, and they had a narrow overtime win over Boston. And after October, you saw that the Pacers were 2-3 and got blown away by the Knicks, and it felt like maybe they were taking a step back. And yes, it's true that the Pacers had a very slow start. They ended up being 7-8 in November, 7-7 in December. Sure, this isn't horrific. This is still play-in range level play. But if the Pacers were going to be considered a title contender, as we thought they would be going in, this was not the results that we would want to see. They became a slightly below average play-in caliber team, the Pacers of a few years ago, right? And that was the case because of poor perimeter defense, the lack of a true star. Tyrese Halliburton was Pascal Siakam's not built to be the guy. Of course, we saw in Toronto, right? Kawhi, and then you had Kyle Lowry, and then Pascal Siakam in terms of stardom, right? He was maybe third on the pecking order on that Raptors team. And the Pacers here, they have Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam as maybe number 2 instead in terms of who your stars are. And Tyrese being at 1 and not playing well. He was slumping bad the entire first half of the year, and Nesmith and Nembhard went down with injury. Of course, the front court got decimated, had to sign Thomas Bryant. The Pacers were struggling to sort of find their footing, and then the calendar turned to January, and they started their resurgence before the new year, but really at the turn of the calendar is when the Pacers started to pop. Seemingly out of nowhere, they went 10-2 in January. They were the best team in 2025 for a while. They knocked off Cleveland. They ripped off multiple 5+ game win streaks in a row. Meaning winning 5+ games in a row. Those win streaks, I suppose they weren't happening all in a row. Otherwise, that'd be a 10-game win streak of some sorts. But they got to a point where they even winning 6 in a row against good teams with strong players, strong rosters. And that team happened, or that happened really because the team got healthy. Thomas Bryant started playing well. Halliburton returned, and more supporting cast guys emerged as stardom-capable playmakers. And we saw what a Pacers team, fully healthy and turned on, what they are capable of doing. We saw that in this period of time at the beginning of January when they were the best team in the league since the start of the new year. And then, of course, as we mentioned, the recent struggles, they've sort of tapered off a little bit. Myles Turner has been out. He's a game-time decision at the moment with a neck injury. He had an inadvertent hit. I forget which game that occurred in, but it was an unfortunate, random, unlucky play. And what's difficult about the loss of Myles Turner is that's a loss in the front court and a loss in the backcourt. And because, right, he shoots threes at a very high level and also, of course, is one of the big men that is down low on defense. Myles Turner's a great player. He's all over the floor. He has an impact everywhere he is, and that's the reason, part of the reason why the Pacers have been so good. And him coming out during a West Coast swing when we're starting to play playoff caliber teams again, and the stretch, the stretch of the schedule became a little bit more difficult. That's where you started to see the impact of the loss of Myles Turner really showing itself. On top of that, the schedule hasn't really treated us well, right? This team is 4-3 in February. They've had some shaky wins as well, but they went to Paris, came back for 2 home games, and then went on a 4-game West Coast swing. And the first game they had at home when they came back was the Knicks. That ended up being a loss as well. And then turn around, go way back out to Washington to play the Wizards, and then we had the All-Star break. So this team has really experienced some whiplash without Myles Turner. A lot of fatigue going overseas, back at home, then all the way out west, and then a lot of back and forth in terms of travel, and that's really made, I think, contributed to some of the struggles of the Pacers. On top of that, their win streak was primarily, of course, against inferior opponents that are maybe play-in range or even below that. And now the Pacers started to play teams like the Clippers, and they started to play teams like the Lakers and the Knicks. Dropped a few games there. They beat the Clippers, but they had a very slow start in that game as well. Had to come back and fight for it. So they've been in some close games against the Jazz and the Wizards on this West Coast swing. They've lost straight up to playoff teams. The Pacers are not quite playing like a title contender right now, but I want to take that with a grain of salt because, yes, Myles Turner has been out, and the team has been going all over the world, it feels like, quite literally, in the last few weeks and really the last month. So coming out of the All-Star break is an opportunity for the Pacers to settle in, right? They play 4 consecutive home games to start. 3 of them, the first 3, are against West playoff teams. The rest of February looks like this. It has Memphis at home on Thursday. I may attend that game. I think it's going to be fantastic. The Clippers, another playoff team in the West. The Nuggets they'll play, and the Raptors. That should be an easy one to round it out. And then they're going to go to Miami to play their rival. That's an opportunity where it's a tough stretch, but most of those games are at home, which is a nice break for the Pacers. I would love to see this team go 4-1. I would more than happily take 3-2. 2-3 I would accept because it's not outrageous to suggest that they just lose to all 3 of those West playoff teams or maybe drop a game on the road against the Heat. I would accept 2-3. 1-4 or 0-5 is when you're really starting to be concerned about the Pacers on a larger scale. I don't think that will happen by any means. It's a manageable but challenging and testing, perhaps, end of February after the All-Star break, and I'm interested to see how that set of 5 games goes for Indiana. March is also not that bad. Only 5 of the 17 games occurring in March are against top 6 playoff teams. What I mean by that is teams in the top 6 of these are the top 6 in the West. That's what I mean when I say playoff teams on this show, just as a general rule of thumb. And if I see play-in range teams, I'm meaning the 7 to 10, and then outside of that is, of course, the teams outside of that, surefire lottery pick teams. So March, to me, honestly, isn't that bad because the only teams that they play in the top 6 of the conference on either side, there's only 5 of them. 3 of those games are at home as well. So again, a manageable month of March, and then April, of course, is when the season starts to sputter out. They end with the Cavs twice in 1 week. They also will go to Denver. If they're in a close race at the end of March, they could drop a couple games against the Nuggets and the Cavaliers late in the season, and that could be where we're looking at the difference between a 4 or 5 seed, because keep in mind, the Pacers are just a game and a half above, or really 1 game ahead of the Milwaukee Bucks for the 4 seed, and the Bucks have beaten the Pacers twice already this season, and they'll play 2 more times again in the month of March. So what's important to me is that the Pacers need to be at least, I would say, and this is generous, if they're 4 games above the Bucks, that'd be fantastic. I think I want them to be at least 2 to 3 games ahead of the Bucks or the Pistons, whoever's right below them, for the 4 seed. And we'll talk about this in terms of ceiling and floor in a second, but I think the 3 seed is largely out of reach for Indiana. But if Indiana can put themselves in a position where they're at the beginning of April, on April Fool's Day, if they're 2 or 3 games ahead of the Bucks, they can drop a couple against the Cavs or the Nuggets, although we'd appreciate it if they got hot at the end of the year. That puts them in a position to defend the 4 seed, which, again, is important. And we know last year how the Pacers found themselves in Game 7s time and time again, especially in that Knicks series, of course. If they get Game 7 at home against the Bucks, that is a massive, massive difference, and I don't need to necessarily explain that to you. But let's get into the ceiling and floor as a result, because March is manageable, February is manageable, but really at the end of March, because of the lack of quantity of games, perhaps, the low quantity of games and the difficulty of them in April, it feels to me like the Pacers need to try to take a 2 to 3 game lead in the East, of course, between the 4 and 5 seed, in order to maintain that 4 seed in the Eastern Conference playoffs if they're 2 to 3 games ahead of Milwaukee at the start of April. In terms of standings positioning, right? Again, they're, to me, locked out of the 3 seed. They're 5.5 games back without the tiebreaker to the Knicks. They don't play that team again in the regular season. They're only 1 game ahead of Milwaukee. Again, they're 0-2 against Milwaukee, and they play them twice again in March. So the Bucks easily, if things stay the course that they're on right now, the Bucks easily, with just 1 win there, can take control of the 4 seed just like that. So the Pacers have to keep winning. They have to win the games that they're favored in heavily. They have to win the games they're supposed to, and at least at a certain rate, knock off some of the teams above them in the standings or in their area in the standings for sure. So they're 1 game ahead of Milwaukee, and they're 2 games ahead of Detroit, who they don't play again, but that's something that they need to watch out for, is the Pistons. They're right on their heels. So I think realistically the ceiling is the 4 seed, unfortunately, for the Pacers. But really look out in terms of the floor, because this floor could really fall out between the feet of the Indiana Pacers if Detroit and Milwaukee get hot and the Pacers start to sputter out of the All-Star break. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Pacers will be fine, but it's something to pay attention to, right? Because Indiana, again, is a team that is sure in control of the 4 seed, and they have been for a while, but they're barely above Milwaukee, and they're barely above Detroit. They should be able to hold strong and pick up the 4 seed. Even though the Pacers are presumably in the playoffs, right? They'll be in the top 6 most likely. Even though that's the case, most likely these pivotal games are still pivotal, right? If the Pacers are playing someone even keeled with them in the standings, those Bucks games in March, they play them twice in a week. Those 2 games against Milwaukee are going to be massive and big-time games to watch in terms of the East standings, and there's plenty of those. They play the Timberwolves twice in March. They'll play the Mavericks, too. We'll see if Anthony Davis is back by then. The Pacers have some big-time games against some big star power in March, even though the schedule is manageable with there being 17 games and quite a few of them being against teams like the Wizards and the Hornets. The Pacers still have a lot to keep track of, and they have a lot to hold down and a lot to stay on top of, perhaps. Because if Indiana starts to slip, Milwaukee and Detroit rather could round into form, and next thing you know, against some division opponents, you've fallen out of the top 4, and you find yourself as a 6 seed again, having to go on the road against the Knicks in Game 7. That is going to be certainly a difficult step and an uphill battle. I want the Pacers to maintain the 4 seed. I want them to have Game 7 if it happens at home in the first round, especially if they're playing an evenly matched team like the Bucks. And this stretch in March and April and February is very, very important. So yes, 30-23, 7 games above 500, a game above the Bucks. The Pacers still very pivotal games, very pivotal results. Wins or losses in the regular season in March are going to be very, very important to dictate their likelihood of a path to championship in the playoffs. And it leads me to my next question of whether or not the Pacers can win a championship. My answer is yes. I think the Pacers can win a championship this year. They have all the pieces necessary, in my opinion. They have beaten the most of the top teams in the East at least once. They went to Cleveland and won, right? They have won the season series against the Celtics. The Knicks they've struggled against, but they picked off a game against them. They've beaten most of the teams in the East. They've shown their capabilities last season as well. The next step is Memphis on Thursday in terms of the march to the championship. The fear for Indiana is that they can contend, but when they get to the Eastern Conference Finals and have to play a team like last year's Boston Celtics, they're just going to lose 4-1 again. I would contend with that, the idea that the Pacers were very close in Game 1. We remembered how they folded and gave that game away, and it felt like they were giving the series away as well as a result. But the Pacers, in my opinion, if they get to the Eastern Conference Finals and get to the NBA Finals, yeah, it's going to be real difficult for them to win a 7-game series against the Thunder. But we know how good the Pacers are when they're hot because they beat anybody and everybody. And they contended with the Thunder when they were hot. But in January, when they were 10-2, playing their best basketball so far this season, they went to Cleveland and won undeniably. This is a Pacers team when it's hot that is really capable of anything. Yeah, you can say the same about the Cavs. You can say the same about the Thunder. But they could work themselves into a manageable situation where they have a percent chance, right? The Pacers have a realistic percent chance of winning the NBA title. Every team has a chance right now, obviously, technically. The Hawks have a chance right now, but they don't, right? Realistically, the Hawks aren't going to win a title. I think the Pacers, you could say, realistically, are in your short list of teams that could win a championship and certainly could at least get to the NBA Finals out of the East if things go their way. The next step, like I said, is Memphis on Thursday. I'm nervous just because I'm always nervous as an Indiana sports fan, but also because there are some tough games on the schedule moving forward with against some teams that are pretty strong in the East, we'll say. And I want to be optimistic about the Pacers. I am optimistic about the Pacers. I hope they can lock down the 4 seed. That, to me, on a larger scale, is the first step towards a championship that I think is something that will be consequential. If they fall down to the 5 or 6, we're having a different conversation about the playoffs and the Pacers in the playoffs. They can lock down that 4. I am very optimistic, and if they can win those pivotal games against the Bucks, the Cavs, the Nuggets, the Timberwolves, I feel great about the Pacers and their chances moving forward. But again, the next step is Memphis on Thursday. We'll preview that game on Wednesday. That will be a big one across the board. I'm very excited to see how things play out for Indiana. All right, good segment about the Pacers. I want to talk about Purdue. Purdue, things are looking a little bit more grim. The Pacers have been struggling recently, and so have the Boilermakers. My question to you is, how concerning is Purdue's 2-game losing streak at this time? Purdue's lost control of the Big Ten, right? There was a time where they were leading the Big Ten. There was a time where they were tied at the top of the Big Ten. They're now in conference 11-4. They have 2 more losses than Michigan does. They're at the top at, I believe, 12-2. I'm not sure. I don't actually have the math down on how many games back that is, but it's more than one, right? 12-2, 11-4. Pacers have 2 more losses. That means that Michigan's going to have to lose 2 more times for there to be a tiebreaker scenario, and Michigan State and Wisconsin are still in the mix. Wisconsin now has a tiebreaker over Purdue. They at least won that game just a couple days ago, and Purdue, of course, goes to Michigan State tomorrow. what happened, right? So far, during this difficult stretch of the Big Ten schedule, Purdue went to Michigan and lost 75-73. They came home to play Wisconsin and lost 94-84. First question, how do these losses occur, right? Mainly the Wisconsin games I want to talk about because that is the most recent one. Wisconsin and Michigan, to me, are better than first glances would probably suggest. Wisconsin scores, and they score a lot. They shoot the ball a lot, and they score the majority of the time. And that makes it very difficult. It makes it very difficult to beat Wisconsin when they score at that high of a level. When Braden Smith, your leading scorer on the year, at least from the backcourt's perspective, is having a down game. He had 4 in the first half. I believe he ended the game with 6. Trakoff and Wren needed to put up 32, have a career game just for Purdue to really feel like they were in it and make the game competitive at home. That's very concerning. And in the past, I've praised Purdue's ability to have a supporting cast that picks up the slack, right? In the past, I've praised Purdue, and the reason why I thought Purdue was built to last in March is because Braden Smith, if he's the guy, right? He's the takeover guy in the backcourt. But if in some way, shape, or form he's having a down game, someone else is going to step up. Fletcher Lawyer has stepped up in the past. CJ Cox has stepped up. Myles Colvin has stepped up. All of these guys have had big-time games where they've been the one to take over in the backcourt. And against Wisconsin, the team that you most need a premier score in the backcourt against, there was really no one. I didn't really see that presence of picking up the slack in the backcourt for Purdue. Fletcher Lawyer had 15, but I wanted more from him. He was 50% from the field and 50% for 3, 4 for 8, and 2 for 4 in both of those marks. I wanted more from Fletcher Lawyer, right? And yeah, Cox had 13 to keep him in it, but still, to me, it wasn't enough. If CJ Cox is putting up a confident 13 maybe to keep the team in the game, and Trakoff Marin has to score 32, Wisconsin's not the best team in the country, right? Wisconsin's not the best team in the Big Ten. And Wisconsin, although is fantastic, and I think fully is a dark horse to make the Final Four, that's a game where if you find yourself in March and you're playing yet another top 25 opponent in a row, and Braden Smith is somehow having a down game, Purdue's in trouble, right? If Braden Smith is off, this team will lose to someone that can score because there isn't someone to fill in for Braden Smith's production when it's missing. Fletcher Lawyer is supposed to be that guy. He hasn't really been so far this season, which is okay if Braden Smith is on, because then Fletcher Lawyer is a phenomenal role player. He's exactly the type of guy to supplement the presence of Braden Smith. But Braden Smith, if he's off, the team is off, right? And that's exactly what happened here in this game. Braden Smith is off, and there was no one to fill in that level of production, and Trakoff Marin did his best. CJ Cox did a decent job, and that's how this game was so close for the majority of it. But Purdue ultimately lost at home to Wisconsin, and from a skill performance standpoint, it really wasn't that close. It was a 10-point game, but if TKR and CJ Cox are not putting in a full over the maximum effort, Wisconsin wins by more than double digits, well over double digits, on the road against Purdue in Mackey Arena, and that is concerning. So the question is, how concerned are we, right? How much does this make us question maybe Purdue's strength moving forward? Because it makes me feel like Purdue can't win a championship, because we may just run into the same problem as last year, where when it comes down to it, they can't keep up with the big dogs. They couldn't keep up with UConn last year. What happens if Purdue plays Auburn? Well, we saw that, and they lost. What happens if Purdue plays Duke and Cooper Flagg, right? What happens if Braden Smith is having a down game? Purdue's just going to lose against a team that can score and is fundamentally at their level or above it in terms of skill or athleticism or effort or whatever it may be. Braden Smith has to be on. And if he is, this team could win a championship. And I don't think I'm kidding when I say that either, just because of the nature of the chaos of the NCAA tournament and how a team like Auburn or Duke could drop down in the Sweet 16 or something of that idea. Purdue's a team that can win it all. If Braden Smith is playing well and the supporting cast is doing its job, this is a team that can win a national championship. We'll see if they can actually do that. It's going to rely on Braden Smith, and it's very important to watch how he's playing in the Big Ten tournament, how he's playing at the end of the regular season, and how he's playing in the first couple of rounds of the NCAA tournament, if they advance that far, to where we'll kind of have an idea of what Purdue is going to be moving forward. There's this narrative that they're nothing without Zach Edey, or at least there was. That's clearly not true, but they kind of need Braden Smith right now, because if he's not there, it doesn't feel like there's a premier guy that can step up in his place. Fletcher Lawyer fills that role on the roster, but he doesn't quite do a great job of that, in my opinion, in most situations. Maybe he can prove me wrong. I am worried that he may not be able to, and that's one of the reasons why I'm worried about Purdue moving forward across the board. They play Michigan State tomorrow night, so we obviously, every other weekday, come on this show, We're not going to talk tomorrow, but we will talk on Wednesday and sort of recap and review what happened in that game against Michigan State. It's a battle for the control of the 2 seed, all right? Michigan State's 11-3 in the Big Ten play. Purdue is 11-4. So the win of this game, it's a half-game difference. The win of this game straight up takes not only, I believe, the tiebreaker, but also just takes control of the 2 seed across the board. So it's a battle for control of the 2 seed at 7 p.m. on Peacock on Tuesday night. Like I said, Michigan State's half a game ahead. And Purdue's also fighting to stay in the title race in the regular season. There's 4 to 6 games left for every team in the Big Ten. Michigan's 2 losses, I suppose, ahead of Purdue. Purdue has 2 more than them. So it's still close, right? Michigan could still drop out of that top 1 spot, and Purdue versus Michigan State tomorrow night is going to really prove which team is next in the pecking order to take up that mantle. Michigan State just lost to IU, and then they blew away Illinois on the road. They play 4 more ranked conference games in a row. So Purdue is next. I believe they have Wisconsin at some point. They have Maryland at some point. They'll honestly, it's probably Michigan. They'll play another one against another ranked conference opponent in the Big Ten. That's where we're at with Michigan State coming into this game. Again, Purdue battling for control of the 2 seed against Michigan State. Michigan State is 20-5. They're 11-3, and they're second in the Big Ten. I want to preview this game, look at the strengths of Michigan State, looking at how Purdue can win. Michigan State is a physical team that draws fouls and then makes their free throws, right? They get fouled above average compared to the rest of the country, right, and especially compared to the rest of the Power 5. And they make their free throws at an 80% clip as a team when they have the opportunity to shoot them. So they're a physical team down low. They draw fouls, and then they make their free throws. So what that's going to have to mean for Purdue is that they're going to have to make their free throws in their own right, because if this game is close on the road down the stretch, that's where your free throws count the most. You can't let that be a factor if you're Purdue. You can't let that be a reason why you struggle to win down the stretch, because at the end of the day, in close games in college basketball and any level of basketball, if you make your free throws, you have a much better chance of winning close games down the stretch. Michigan State makes their free throws. Purdue has to at least match that to cancel out that strength that Michigan State carries. They defend the 3 well. They move the ball around well, but they turn it over. All right, they're one of the best teams in terms of assists in the country and in the Power 5 or the Power 6, whatever you want to call it. But they often turn the ball over above average in those categories as well. They have a great backcourt. Jaden Akins is their leading scorer. He's a guard. He scores 13.2 a game. And you might notice that he only scores 13.2 a game, and that is notable because Michigan State spreads the ball around. This is a deep team. There's a lot of roster talent. There's a lot of guys that can score, plenty of role players, plenty of fifth mans on the court that step in and make plays. They're one of the best assisting teams in the country. They move the ball around very well. They spread the love. They spread the distribution of the basketball, and as a result, the distribution of the scoring at a very effective rate. So Purdue, on the other side, right, they're going to have to get to the ball quick defensively. They're going to have to get to the ball quick, thwart possessions before they can even develop, because if you give Michigan State a chance to develop their possessions and carry the basketball through, they're going to have a much better chance to score because they're great at creating shots, finding open guys, and hitting the shots when they have the opportunity to. And if you let a possession get too close to the rim, they're probably going to draw a foul and make their free throws. So Michigan State gets points unless they turn the ball over, which is exactly what happens a lot of times where teams just get after Michigan State right away defensively. We're going to have to see some great one-on-one defense from Purdue in the backcourt. We're looking at Fletcher Loyer. We're looking at Braden Smith. That's going to be difficult. Jaden Akins is fantastic. This backcourt for Michigan State is fantastic. That's their strength of their team on offense. Purdue's going to have to play some great one-on-one perimeter defense and ultimately just not give Michigan State, the crowd, the student section, something to yell about. Because at the end of the day, you're going on the road in the Big Ten against a team in the top 25, and Michigan State, at least before the update to the AP Top 25, which is happening in about 20 minutes at the time of recording this, you're playing a team that's very difficult to beat, right? Considering the quality of opponent and location of the game. Don't give that crowd something to yell about or something to cheer about, right? If you're thwarting possessions right away, forcing turnovers as quick as possible, making your shots on the other end, making your free throws, letting Trakoff and Wren bash and bang inside, play this game fundamentally sound and play this game the way you're supposed to. Otherwise, Michigan State's going to get hot. They're going to start hitting threes. They're going to stop you from hitting threes, right? They're going to play great defense on the other end. They're going to get inside. They're going to play the game physically and effectively. And next thing you know, Purdue's down by 6 on the road late, and the game feels lost, right? And that's honestly what I think is most likely going to happen. I'm hesitant for Purdue. I struggle to do predictions on this show because more often than not, I just pick the team that is in Indiana, right? If Purdue's playing someone, I'm probably picking Purdue. Indiana, I give the benefit of the doubt half the time. So I don't like to do predictions because the point of this show is homerism at the end of the day. I'm hesitant about Purdue in this one. Michigan State may pull this one out at home. I would not be surprised at all. That would hand Purdue its first 3-game losing streak of the year and really raise questions about their ceiling in March because they'd be losing to 3 top 25 teams in conference in a row, one of those games occurring at home. And at the end of the day, when you get to the tournament, you have to win 5, 6, 7 games in a row against top 25 caliber teams away from Mackey Arena. They did a great job of that until they didn't last season. I'm interested to see and maybe concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to do that this season moving forward. So I think Michigan State's going to win this game. It's going to raise questions about Purdue. We're going to have a lot to talk about on Wednesday regardless, whether Purdue goes out and pulls out a win or not. Michigan State, they play great perimeter defense. They play the game physically. They make their free throws. Purdue's just got to do the same thing on the other side and, again, hit those threes, or if they're not, really fuel the ball to trick off from Ren. He had 32 in the last game. I'm interested to see how Purdue approaches Michigan State and how they approach this game, and I'm interested to see how they fare in it moving forward with Michigan State, of course, being a quality opponent on the other side. Big game on Tuesday. I'm concerned about Purdue. I hope they don't give me more reason for concern tomorrow night. Either way, we'll see how it goes and talk all about it on Wednesday. All right, I'm going to take a sip of water, and then we're going to talk about IU men's basketball. We're going to try to be a little positive about that program here. And then, actually, wow. Oh, no, we're totally okay. I had my papers in a strange order, and I thought I had the Purdue segment copy and pasted twice. I thought it was duplicated in the notes. It's not, which makes a lot of sense because the IU segment would have been like 4 lines. Anyway, we're going to talk about IU men's basketball. We're going to talk about some of their bright spots, get into the Colts, and then extend outside of Indiana out to the sip of water. All right, let's talk about IU basketball. Let's talk about some bright spots. I want to talk about Indiana in a positive light because I would like to believe in them, right? Coach Woodson is obviously out after this year. Right after that announcement was made, Indiana started winning. They beat Michigan State. That was a big-time win. I believe that was on the road as well. So one argument is that Indiana's playing a bit more loosely. They're playing a bit more carefree. They're doing their own thing a little bit better because they know that at the end of the day, Mike Woodson isn't going to be there next year. So maybe for a morale standpoint, that kind of boosts things and that allows Indiana to play their own way and play more freely and loosely, as I was saying. That could be an impact. That could be having an impact. We'll see if that carries through the rest of the year. They beat Michigan State and then lost in a close one at home to Mick Cronin and UCLA. But let's talk about some bright spots. Indiana doesn't play a game for a while, which is the reason why we're doing this segment. They played UCLA on Friday night, Valentine's Day. They don't play another game all week long until Purdue on Saturday at 1:30 at home. Big-time game, the biggest game on the schedule for Indiana. It's Purdue in Assembly Hall, and they have plenty of time to prepare for that. That's very exciting for Hoosier fans. And I want to talk about some bright spots and maybe some optimism going into that game. Yes, they had an air home loss to UCLA on Valentine's Day. We have that big break before Purdue. Luke Goody is the number one bright spot for me for Indiana. I love watching Luke Goody play basketball. He averages only 9 points per game on 25 minutes. He's a 42.8% field goal shooter, 40% three-point shooter, which is very good. I like that and by the way, his field goal percentage is so low, partially because the majority of his field goals are threes, right? Again, averages 9 points per game on 25 minutes. He's not a consistent player at all. He's had multiple double-digit performances in recent games, but still can show up and drop 3, right? That's the Luke Goody experience where sometimes he's fantastic, sometimes he's not. It really comes down to whether or not he can hit those threes from the corner. And that leads me into my next point in that he knows his role, and he plays that role very, very well. He understands and is aware of the fact that he is the guy that sort of stands in the corner and shoots threes, right? He knows what he is. He knows what impact he's supposed to have. He plays a clean game. He rarely fouls. He makes his free throws. He makes his free throws at a 92.3% rate. He's only missed 3, and he's taken almost 40. He shoots the 3 ball well, so that's exciting. But my favorite part about Luke Goody is his attitude. He's optimistic. Remember that speech earlier in the year where I believe this was right after Indiana got blown away by Illinois at home. And the conversation was, it was Luke Goody in a press conference, and he was saying, we're going to turn this thing around. Don't switch up on us when we do, instilling a lot of confidence or exemplifying perhaps his confidence in the team, in the roster, in the coaching staff. That was not really accurate, obviously. Indiana's probably not going to turn this thing around, at least maybe to the degree that he would hope. But that optimism was encouraging, and it was inspiring, and it was good to see from a guy that played at Illinois his whole career, right? And then transfers here for a senior year for an opportunity to supplement this IU team that has an opportunity to go up and do great things maybe in the tournament. And it has been a complete failure and a complete letdown. But Luke Goody still clearly loves IU. He's committed to winning. It hurts that this will be his only season. Most likely his only season. There's talk about him maybe getting a fifth-year eligibility due to injury situations. He's the main reason I want to see this thing get turned around this year, right? Luke Goody, now that Woodson's out for sure, Luke Goody's a great guy to root for, fun guy to watch play. Again, he knows his role. He makes his he does everything he's supposed to do. He doesn't foul. He makes his free throws when he needs to. He's the guy you kick out to hit a big three. And yeah, he's not that consistent. He doesn't shoot that well every single game, but when he does, and it's very, very fun to watch. Luke Goody is my number one bright spot for this IU team. And if they somehow, and we'll talk about the likelihood of this in a second, if they somehow work their way into the NCAA tournament, Luke Goody could be a very fun guy to watch and allow them to win one, maybe two games once they get there. The number two bright spot for me for Indiana is their close competition with elite opponents, right? They knocked off MSU just a couple days ago. They lost by 3 to Michigan. They lost by 5 to Purdue. That game, they were leading for a large percentage of that game at Purdue. This team is objectively bad in close games, right? We know that. That's understood. They're 3-5 in Big Ten games that are decided by single-digit margins, right? Maybe they can make a run in the Big Ten tournament later on. The question is whether or not the NCAA tournament is in the picture, and some are calling IU a bubble team, right? If you go to Jerry Palm, Joe Lunardi, whichever bracketologist you most prefer paying attention to, you sometimes see IU in the next 4 out or the first 4 out category. That's really interesting to me because I don't look at their resume and really see anything special that would indicate that they should be in the NCAA tournament. They're 15-11. They're 6-9 in the Big Ten. They are 2-11 in Quad 1. Now, the reason why you could justify putting IU in is that they are capable of winning Quad 1 games because they did, right? And they're 3-0 in Quad 2, right? So they can win games against good teams sometimes, although they lose much more often. But they have no Quad 2 losses. They have no Quad 3 losses. They have no Quad 4 losses. They have 3 Quad 1 opportunities remaining. But this is a certified first 4 dud type of team, right? Maybe they win a first 4 game and then get blown away right away by the 6th seed, like we saw that one year where Indiana beats Wyoming in the first 4 as an 11 seed and then goes on to play St. Mary's and gets absolutely run off the floor. This is kind of the composition of a team like that because they are 6-9 in the Big Ten, but 2-11 in Quad 1. Sure, they don't lose to the teams below them, but they cannot beat the teams above them except for the Michigan State game. And I honestly don't know what their other Quad 1 win is. It's not Providence. I truthfully don't know what that other Quad 1 win is. It's probably screaming at me. I imagine it's probably Penn State on the road. But regardless, right? So far with this resume, this is a team that supposedly would get into the first 4 maybe and then win a game and then get blown to bits in the first round, the true first round of the NCAA tournament. So the question is, can they make it? It is possible, but they have to start winning right now. They have 3 Quad 1 opportunities remaining, including the Purdue game on Saturday. So they have that and the Big Ten tournament to make their case. They don't have any more Quad 4 games. I believe they have 1 Quad 2 and 1 Quad 3 with 3 Quad 1 games in there. So if they can pick up a couple Quad 1 wins here towards the end, if they can turn that 2-11 into a 5-11 and then win a couple games in the Big Ten tournament, maybe this IU team has an opportunity to qualify for the NCAA tournament. I don't think they will. I just don't imagine that being the case. They could maybe be a 2 or 3 in the NIT, but I don't think IU really has an opportunity of qualifying for the NCAA tournament. If they do, there'll be a team in the first 4 or in the first round that the second they play a team that's 8 seed or higher, they get destructed by, because again, they're 2-11 in Quad 1. That is not the makings of an NCAA tournament team by any stretch of the imagination. The only thing really going for them is that they don't have any losses anywhere else. All of their losses are in Quad 1, and they, of course, play a tough schedule in the Big Ten. It's possible that they make the NCAA tournament. Their bright spots of Luke Goody and, of course, their close competition against elite opponents is very encouraging, but I don't think the NCAA tournament is really in question for Indiana moving forward, although I would love to be proved wrong. Okay, let's switch over to the Indianapolis Colts. There's some exciting stuff going on with the Colts. Of course, it's the offseason, kind of a lull. We got the Pacers to talk about. We've got the NBA to talk about. We've got college basketball to talk about. Basketball's really in the heat of it. And I believe this week, spring training is going to start in the MLB. So there's a lot going on, but the NFL still reigns supreme in America. The Colts still reign supreme in my heart personally. Let's talk about the Myles Garrett situation. Could the Colts make a move for Myles Garrett? He's requested a trade from the Cleveland Browns. He will likely get his wish. The question is, where is he going? And there's a lot of options, right? The consensus baseline for a price for Myles Garrett appears to be 2 first-round picks, right? Based on my research, it seems like if you're trying to grab Myles Garrett, you have to give up 2 first-round picks, and preferably ones, of course, that are close in proximity to the current year. This would give Cleveland multiple opportunities to spark their rebuilds and potentially grab a valuable player on top of that, right? So one thing I'm seeing is something along the lines of, you know how Pat McAfee kind of called out the entire Colts organization and called out a ton of players, guys like Zaire Franklin, said that he didn't want him on the team anymore. This is an opportunity for the Colts to maybe give up a quality defensive piece and 2 first-round picks for Myles Garrett, which is a lot to ask for, but this allows Cleveland to, again, spark their rebuild. They can grab a quarterback at some point, grab another role player, a skill position player, something like that, offensive line, and then grab a valuable player on top of that to sort of fill in the gaps of this defense or fill in the gaps of their offense, whatever it may be. Someone young, a surefire success to guarantee a return on investment. I have seen 2 trade ideas between the Colts and the Browns circulating around Indianapolis Colts circles perhaps recently. The first one is that the Colts would give up for Myles Garrett 2 first-round picks and Kwity Paye. Kwity Paye would be that young, valuable player that the Browns could use to fill the gap of whatever position he would be in, whoever that player is. In this case, is Kwity Paye and 2 first-rounders. Paye had 8 sacks this past season. This is a tall order for me, right? In terms of whether or not this is actually going to happen, I think giving up Kwity Paye and 2 first-rounders is a lot. Think about what those picks could be, right? If things go awry, maybe that's our future quarterback in 2026. I don't know if that is fully worth it. And the pass rush to me is already it's not totally fine, but the pass rush to me is already good enough to where I couldn't justify selling the future for a guy like Myles Garrett if you're adding Kwity Paye into that conversation. But that's kind of what we'd be looking at, is 2 first-rounders and a guy like Kwity Paye, if not Kwity Paye himself. That to me is too much to ask for. Right? If I'm making this trade, and I don't know everything, but if I'm making this trade, I'd be hesitant. Because think about what those 2 first-round picks could be. In this draft, it could be Tyler Warren, right? It could be a safety. It could be someone else to supplement the secondary. Next season, it could be another piece to supplement the secondary as the Colts are rebuilding themselves into a playoff and maybe AFC title contender. Or maybe that's our next quarterback, is in the 2026 draft that we could be giving away to the Browns by giving away our pick. The second idea is a trade for Anthony Richardson, which I saw and my eyebrows raised and I was alarmed. I don't think this is realistically anything that's going to have any chance of happening, right? But it's the idea is that the Colts need another pass rusher. The Browns need a QB. In terms of need and value, Anthony Richardson and Myles Garrett are pretty similar. You could straight up trade them. Maybe some picks get involved there. This one's too much for me as well. I think it's way too risky because I want Anthony Richardson to stick around, right? I think that he deserves another year. We'll see what the conversation is like at the end of the season. But for right now, I believe in AR. I think Anthony Richardson should be our starting quarterback in 2025, at least for this year. So this is too much for me as well. Because first of all, just fundamentally, I think we should keep Anthony Richardson. But even if I didn't, potentially not having a quarterback or having another old aging quarterback, someone like maybe Aaron Rodgers, foreshadowing to the rest of the episode and the rest of the week, bringing someone like him in, I just don't quite see a world where this is the desirable outcome, trading them straight up effectively 1-1 for one another. With the addition of Garrett, what would this do? If the Colts grab Myles Garrett, what would this do? And I just talked about how the 2 main trade ideas I've seen circulating, or the trade structures I've seen circulating, I just talked about why I don't particularly think that they would work or that they're worth it for the Colts. But if they did add Garrett, right, Indy would likely have one of the best pass rushes in the league. It would be DeForest Buckner, Myles Garrett, Grover Stewart, and Laiatu Latu. There are some big names on that pass rush. And we just saw with the Eagles winning the Super Bowl just how important having a great pass rush like that can be to your efforts of winning a Super Bowl, and how building out your offensive and defensive line first is most important. And yeah, I believe that that's probably true. With the addition of Garrett, the Colts would be stellar in a Super Bowl caliber pass rush across the board with that 4. But the question is, at what cost would we have to achieve that, right? Because that massively decreases the likelihood of us remedying the secondary, right? If we give up 2 first-round picks, then our opportunity to grab a safety or a corner in the next 2 drafts massively decreases. And certainly, it compromises the near future of possibly snagging a fresh young quarterback if things don't work out for AR, which, of course, is a very plausible outcome in the next couple of years for the Indianapolis Colts. So, again, sure, it's weighing the cost of having the Super Bowl caliber, a Super Bowl caliber pass rush, right, with those 4, Buckner, Garrett, Stewart, and Latu, and maybe potentially compromising the secondary or compromising the quarterback position. To me, it's too much risk for what we would receive with Myles Garrett. 2 firsts and a quality player like Kwity Paye is too much for me to imagine giving up. It is tempting because Garrett could be what the Colts need to lift themselves to the playoffs, right? I'm sure that if the Colts grab Myles Garrett for 2 first-round picks, the Colts will probably be in the playoffs next season. But we're trying to win Super Bowls, right? And if we're going to look to win a Super Bowl, I think this risk might not be worth the reward, considering the price and considering, again, just how lofty that risk is and just how dramatic the swing of that risk is. Because maybe we get Garrett and everything works out and Richardson is fantastic and we go win a Super Bowl, or Richardson struggles, the secondary is getting blown up every single week, right? And Myles Garrett is fantastic, but it's not quite enough to outweigh the struggles that we're having in other areas of the field. And then maybe that just keeps the Colts out of the playoffs entirely, and we continue to rebuild and struggle, and now we have to pay Myles Garrett $1 trillion, and then the conversation starts to talk about how Chris Ballard made yet another mistake. I still want to see us nab a safety in a free agency, or alternatively a corner that maybe fits our needs a bit more snugly in terms of a move. We keep talking about how we want a big free agency move from Chris Ballard, and Myles Garrett would be that. I just don't think it's quite the right fit for the Colts right now, considering the price, considering the risk, and considering the current state of the Colts and the state of the league. We're trying to win Super Bowls, and we're trying to get ourselves back to that point. Myles Garrett would help us a lot. I think it's more likely that Myles Garrett slots into a team like the Lions that are maybe 1 player away from elevating to a Super Bowl caliber team, right? Whether or not he gets traded is still unclear. But the Browns are trying to completely clean house and rebuild, right? And Myles Garrett's trying to win a Super Bowl. And the Colts, I don't think, are the location. Because if Myles Garrett just plugs into a pass rush that needs 1 more elite pass rusher to win a Super Bowl, like the Lions maybe it's the Bills, right? There's a lot of teams that seem like they're 1-star player like Myles Garrett away from winning it all. That's where I think Myles Garrett will go. The Colts, sure, he would elevate to a playoff team, theoretically, but we're trying to win Super Bowls, and I think right now we need to build from the ground up a little bit better rather than supplement a star into the lineup as maybe you would think would be the right idea. That's my opinion. I don't think Myles Garrett is what the Colts need right now. I don't think they'll make a move for him. It's possible. It's tempting. It's flashy. It's fun. It's interesting. I just don't think that's the right move for the Colts right now. And I think Myles Garrett will either stay in Cleveland or go elsewhere, but he won't be coming to Indianapolis, in my opinion. Okay, let's talk about the NBA All-Star Game. I don't have a lot to say, but I watched it, and I think that is important to note. When I say I watched it, I want to take that with a grain of salt. First of all, shout out Pascal Siakam. Again, 4 points, only Pacer in there. That was fun to watch. He was fun to see. I enjoyed Zach Edey as well. Lifelong Purdue fan. Enjoyed Trayce Jackson-Davis. But just some background, right? I say take this with a grain of salt. I was watching at the same time. I ignored SNL just because I didn't really care. I was a massive NASCAR fan growing up. So I watched the Daytona 500 as I usually do most years just because I miss football and I want something. And the Daytona 500 is always fun and interesting, and it was again. I had the Daytona 500 on the TV. I had the NBA All-Star Game on my phone. And I was really interested, honestly, to see which one captured my attention more. It ended up being the Daytona 500. That ended up capturing my attention far more than the NBA All-Star Game did. I kept going back to the NBA All-Star Game. I kept it on most of the time. But the Daytona 500 was what I wanted to watch. And that makes sense, right? Because the Daytona 500 is kind of the best race of the year in NASCAR, even more than the championship race. I don't pay attention to NASCAR like I do the NBA. But still, the Daytona 500, bigger spectacle, real game, right? Real event, real results that mean something to a championship chase or championship race, perhaps. Pun intended, we'll say. So the Daytona 500 took my attention, but I did watch the NBA All-Star Game. I did have it on. There was some defensive effort, some hands up, some low stances, right? Guys were bending their knees, which we didn't exactly see last season. But it still felt fake to me, and like a deep three shootout, unless there was an open lane, in which case it's an uncontested dunk. That's what it felt like to me. It had a few good moments, but it wasn't really all that great. I didn't really care all that much. From an entertainment perspective, Kevin Hart was a joy. I liked the smack talk between general managers on the broadcast. That was fun. Kenny and Chuck and Candace and Shaq, right? That was fun. So the NBA All-Star Game, from an entertainment perspective, there were good moments. I thought the Mr. Beast gimmick was cool because he made the shot, but I didn't really understand why Mr. Beast was there. Things like that, right? Kevin Hart was a joy, but it felt gimmicky. It felt like they were really trying to force this entertainment onto us, and I just wanted to watch NASCAR because it felt like the people playing or racing in NASCAR, broadcasting NASCAR, cared about the NASCAR, right? The NBA All-Star Game, everyone knows that the players don't care. Nobody cares. The fans in the building didn't really care. It wasn't a big deal. But NASCAR was fun because it's the Daytona 500 and everyone's trying to win, right? And so it was competitive, it was fun, it was interesting. I watched that. Probably won't watch a single other NASCAR race all year long, but I watched that, right? Because it's the Daytona 500, and that was far more entertaining than the NBA All-Star Game. And it was, I guess, unfortunate for the NBA that the Daytona 500 got delayed because I got to watch that instead of the NBA. Regardless, the conversation I'm hearing right now is the question of whether or not we should make it into a USA versus World game. This potentially puts more pride on the line. America, theoretically, playing to keep America as considered the number one country, I suppose, basketball country in the world. And guys like Shea get to represent Canada, or wow, I'm losing myself completely. I can't think of another example. But Luka gets to represent his country, right? Jokic gets to represent his country. That's fun. It's interesting. Giannis in Greece is a great example. Guys get to represent the world, right, and sort of the flavors of the rest of the world culturally and in basketball. Maybe that makes more pride on the line. Maybe that allows the players to care more. I think that would be interesting. Another idea for me is that you could incentivize defensive plays. So you could give people bonuses for or whatever, cash bonuses for stealing the basketball, forcing a turnover, blocks, things like that. My thought is that you could truthfully incentivize defense, where you give people money for being successful on defense. And you can do the same with offense, right, just to keep the whole thing logically fair. But you can give individual players cash bonuses for playing the game defensively. And I would just say that if you gave people bonuses, if you gave people money for how they did on the court on offense and defense, you put an emphasis on the defense, right? You give people more money, give people more prize for being successful on defense, steals, turnovers, blocks, whatever you want to do. I think that'd be fun. I think that'd be interesting. I think it'd make it a little bit more entertaining. And guys, even though they're all rich, they're playing against one another. They're looking to sort of give themselves an opportunity to make a little more. There's a little bit of bragging rights there. I got the $100 that you couldn't get because I blocked your shot. Something along those lines. I think that's fun. That's interesting. That could work. I have no idea if that makes logical sense. Maybe that would play out horribly. In my head, it makes picture perfect sense, but plenty of ideas make picture perfect sense. It's a tongue twister in my head, and they don't actually pan out very well. But that's an idea, right? Incentivize individual playmaking that allows some one-on-one stuff to happen. I think a one-on-one tournament would be great for the NBA All-Star Game as well. Maybe that should just be what we have, just like the NFL has kind of transitioned over to flag football. So that's what I want to see, right? One-on-one tournament, maybe USA versus the World game. Maybe you're incentivizing regardless. You're incentivizing steals, turnovers financially, right? I think that'd be fun. I think that could be a way to maybe remedy the NBA All-Star Game. I don't think I'll care ever again. If they switch it up, if they do this again, if they do the tournament again, I won't care. I'll pay attention to the voting. I'll pay attention to the teams. I'll kind of laugh about how it's OGs versus young stars, things like that. I won't watch the game because I just don't care. So if they make it USA versus World, maybe I'll care. I'll tune in the second half if it feels like people are playing well in the first. If it's one-on-one, I'll watch for sure. But for the most part, I don't think I'll care about the All-Star Weekend ever again, at least in the with the nature of what it is like now. I don't see myself particularly enjoying it in the future. Kevin Hart was fun. It was interesting. There were some good moments on the floor, especially late in games, some of those game winners. But for the most part, I didn't care, and I was focused on the Daytona 500. And that, I think, is concerning for the NBA. I just really don't know how they fix it. Outside of those three ideas I brought up, maybe it's USA versus World, maybe it's a one-on-one tournament, and maybe it is some method of cash bonuses for defensive success. But the NBA All-Star Game, to me, was not that much better, although it was better. I still don't really care and wasn't overly motivated to continue watching. Okay, let's transition to the NFL. And we're talking about the NFL a lot, but it deserves it because it's the NFL. I want to talk about some possible landing spots for Aaron Rodgers. First of all, there's pros and cons to taking him. So, for context, right, in case you're unaware, Aaron Rodgers was basically fired from the Jets. The Jets said, we're moving on. Contract's expiring. We're not going to re-sign you. We want you to go somewhere else. We don't want you here anymore. So the Jets are going a different direction, which raises new questions, right? Because who are the Jets going to take? Are they going to get a guy in free agency? Are they going to potentially draft a guy? Are they going to trade up? Are they going to stay where they are? Who's in that range from a quarterback perspective? The future of the Jets is very up in the air and very interesting. But for Aaron Rodgers, if you're another team in need of a quarterback looking for Aaron Rodgers, the pros and cons are taking him. Yes, it's a veteran, successful quarterback. He didn't have a bad year statistically last year, but he's considered by some toxic, right? And is a complicated social presence, right? He goes on Pat McAfee all the time. He talks a lot. He lets his feelings be known to everyone, and he's much older than everybody else in the locker room. So it's an interesting dynamic, and you really have to be built for that dynamic. So the criteria to me, I have a list of criteria of things that each team would need to have in order to be the right fit for Aaron Rodgers. Number one, they must need a quarterback, obviously. That eliminates most of the league. They must be at least somewhat a contender, either a team on the doorstep of the playoffs or a team on the doorstep of a Super Bowl. And it has to be somewhere that he will start. I've heard this idea that he could go to Chicago and back up Caleb Williams and mentor him. Great idea until you realize it's Aaron Rodgers on the Chicago Bears, and it's Aaron Rodgers with a young quarterback that is better than him. I don't think that from a personality perspective is going to mesh very well. I don't think Aaron Rodgers would enjoy that. I don't think that the Bears would enjoy that. I don't think that's going to happen. But we're looking at teams that are semi-contenders, rebuilding teams. Tennessee is a great example. Yeah, they need a quarterback most likely, but they can't waste 2 years on Aaron Rodgers, right? They can't waste a year on Aaron Rodgers because they're trying to rebuild, and just plugging Aaron Rodgers is just going to complicate things, and it's not like they're going to win a Super Bowl off of it anyway. And Aaron Rodgers at this point is in his career trying to win one more Super Bowl. Titans are in rebuild mode. Aaron Rodgers is a plug-and-play type of guy. You can't put Aaron Rodgers on a rebuilding team and then rebuild around him because you're just wasting time. That's what the Jets did, right? They rebuilt around Aaron Rodgers and thought they could win a Super Bowl, and that wasn't the worst idea, right? Brought in Allen Lazard, brought in everyone that Aaron Rodgers wanted to have on that team, right? Put them on the Jets, see if they can go to the playoffs, win a Super Bowl, and they didn't even come close, and that just is unfortunate, but it wasn't the worst idea moving in. But now we know the Jets failed. The Titans have the first pick in the draft. They were the worst team with the worst record in the NFL last year, right? So the Titans, for example, are not in position to bring on an Aaron Rodgers. It's got to be a team that is capable of winning Super Bowl, or at least capable of elevating to the next level under Aaron Rodgers. So after we take away all of those eliminated options, I'm left with really three. I would say three. I have a fourth one on here. I'll talk about it, but really three landing spots for Aaron Rodgers outside of retirement that could occur and make sense. Indianapolis is the first one. Now, because this is, of course, the Indianapolis Colts, I'm going to make a video or a segment. I'll make a segment about this. It'll come out as an individual YouTube video if you're watching that. You could see another one about Aaron Rodgers on the Colts in a couple days, either Wednesday or Friday. I'll do that episode. I'll talk about that. But Indianapolis, right? He could potentially teach AR, whether he's starting or a backup. I, of course, under my criteria, say that he would have to start. That's a fine idea, except the Colts aren't going to win a Super Bowl, especially if you plug in Aaron Rodgers, right? That'd be crazy PR with Pat McAfee and everything like that. But that will only set back AR, in my opinion, because one of the issues with Anthony Richardson at the moment stems from the fact that he didn't play a lot of games in college because he was injured and he went to the draft early, right? In my opinion, Anthony Richardson, part of his issue is lack of experience, and that shows itself in decision-making in certain moments. That shows itself in composure and in effort sometimes, of course. Talk about him taking a breather in that game at the beginning of the year. So I think AR needs experience, and that's what this year is going to prove to me, because if he plays 17 games, then we're going to have a real understanding of what AR with experience can be, and that will help give us a better idea of whether or not he's the next step, whether or not he's the guy, whether or not he's the franchise quarterback that the Colts need to invest and believe in. So it'll only set back AR if Aaron Rodgers starts, because, yeah, he can probably learn. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to be willing to teach him, because Aaron Rodgers is trying to be the guy and win a Super Bowl somewhere. I don't think Indianapolis is the move. It'd be a bold free agency move. Chris Ballard trying to be a little bit more gutsy. We want him to be more gutsy. But again, similar to the Myles Garrett situation, I don't think this is the move to make. I don't think this is the right fit for the Colts right now. I don't think Aaron Rodgers should go to the Colts. I hope he doesn't. If he does, then we'll accept it and move forward with it. And it'll be exciting. It definitely will be. But I don't think that's the right move for the Colts, given where they are and where they're trying to get at the end of next season in terms of their goals. Las Vegas is the next step. Brady, of course, is a minority owner, right? So he'd be paired with Tom Brady and Pete Carroll, which would be really fun and really interesting and potentially a dynamic that could be fun to watch. A dream team situation. I doubt Rodgers is at this point in his career either, where I don't think Vegas is a Super Bowl team yet. They're not ready to win a Super Bowl, and I don't think Aaron Rodgers is either. But putting Aaron Rodgers on the Raiders is not going to lift them to the playoffs or a Super Bowl, in my opinion. It'll just be a repeat of the Jets. I don't think he should go there either, and we're really running out of options because there's only really one team that I want to talk about that has an opportunity. Pittsburgh's been in conversation, and I think they're going to be in talks with him. I don't think there's enough of a skill performance gap between Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson to justify bringing him into that locker room because of some of that complicated social presence essence, right? But also, what's interesting about Aaron Rodgers is the fact that Mike Tomlin with the Steelers really tries to keep things tight-knit. It's its own little bubble of the world. They try to keep things close to the program. They try to keep things close to the organization. Nothing really leaves the locker room, right? And that's totally fine. That's the way he does it, and it works. Aaron Rodgers is the opposite of that. He goes on Pat McAfee every week. He is very outspoken on social media and various shows, podcasts, whatever. He talks a lot, which is great for him. Totally fine. But that's not a good fit with the Steelers. And they have Russell Wilson and they have Justin Fields. There's no reason to add another quarterback into the mix, especially with how much they would likely have to pay Aaron Rodgers. Not the fit. Steelers, no chance of that happening, in my opinion. I don't think the Colts should happen. I don't think the Raiders should happen. The one that could, the only thing besides retirement, and we'll talk about the retirement outcome in a second. The only thing besides retirement that I think Aaron Rodgers could justify doing is going to the Minnesota Vikings, which would be hilarious because that's just exactly what Brett Favre did, right? He went to the Packers, he went to the Jets, he went to the Vikings, didn't really have much success after winning Super Bowls with the Packers, but regardless, this is a situation where J.J. McCarthy can learn from a truly great quarterback, right? J.J. McCarthy learned from Sam Darnold, and that was working very well. Sam Darnold was playing fantastically. But it felt like the Vikings might be just one elite quarterback away because really what was the Vikings' downfall, right? In the Lions game at the end of the regular season and then in the playoffs, their downfall was poor quarterback play, right? Darnold wasn't good, right? I don't have his stats in front of me, but he wasn't good, right, at the end of the year. Played great all season, did exactly what he needed to do, felt like Brock Purdy, and then collapsed at the end of the year. If they had an elite quarterback, if they had Aaron Rodgers distributing the football, and whether or not you consider Aaron Rodgers elite at this point in his career is kind of irrelevant to me, right? If you have Aaron Rodgers distributing the football in those moments, I think there's a world, and I think there's a situation where the Vikings could go all the way and win a Super Bowl, right? They could be that caliber of a team. Maybe they're the one seed, and who knows, right? If Sam Darnold doesn't fall off a cliff in terms of performance and production at the end of the year for the Vikings, if that's Aaron Rodgers instead and he plays well, the Vikings could win a Super Bowl. So the Vikings feel like they could be one elite quarterback away from winning it all. The question is whether or not Aaron Rodgers is that, whether or not he is that guy that can lift the Vikings to that level. I don't know the answer to that question. I'd love to think about it if Aaron Rodgers goes to Minnesota. This is the only outcome that I feel like could happen. Because again, maybe he can teach J.J. McCarthy and make him the future the second that he leaves. They have kind of similar, I don't know, I don't want to say they have similar play styles, but still, they're two guys that J.J. McCarthy, young quarterback, could use a couple years understudying someone like Aaron Rodgers before starting. And maybe Sam Darnold sticks around and fills that role, but Rodgers could have a lot to teach him. And if he doesn't have a lot to teach him because he doesn't want to, from a personality standpoint, at least he has a lot to show him, right? So J.J. McCarthy could kind of be turned into Aaron Rodgers 2.0, theoretically, in this situation. I don't think so. I don't think that's how that dynamic would play out, but that's something that you would hope for if you're a Vikings fan if this happened. This almost feels likely. If Darnold has moved on from and Rodgers is in free agency, I feel like this could happen, unless they just want to fully invest in J.J. McCarthy, because the Vikings could make a run at a Super Bowl right now, right? They finished the year 14-3. We're at 13-4, something along those lines. They could have been, in my opinion, they were an elite quarterback away. Maybe they had other pieces they were missing, but to me, the Vikings were an elite quarterback away. A fully healthy Vikings team was an elite quarterback away from winning a Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers could be that. This is the only team that I feel like Aaron Rodgers truly could go to, right, at this point in his career. If not, it's retirement. And I feel like Rodgers might end up being like Bill Belichick, because it does to some degree feel like Rodgers has more in the tank. It feels like he might have more to give to the league. But if he doesn't, because same with Bill Belichick, it felt like Bill Belichick still had more to give. But he kind of fell by the wayside and no one really wanted him, and he is now coaching in college after taking a year off. Aaron Rodgers could be like that, where just no one really wants him. There's not a good fit. No one needs him, right? No one needs him in particular. The Vikings are the only caveat to that, in my opinion. I really wonder, is he a Super Bowl caliber quarterback? Is Aaron Rodgers the type of guy that can go out and win you a Super Bowl? I don't know. On a great team like Minnesota, maybe. But is that worth the risk? Is it worth Minnesota maybe giving up a year of this core roster in its prime, having to deal with more free agency signings in the offseason, right? Rodgers is not going to play for someone bad or be a transitional guy. His ego, I think, is too large for that. He wants to win another Super Bowl. Minnesota, to me, is the only possible fit. The question is whether or not Minnesota or Aaron Rodgers fits with Minnesota, right? I think Minnesota fits with Aaron Rodgers. Does Aaron Rodgers fit with Minnesota, right? Does Minnesota want to take a risk on Aaron Rodgers and say, you've been our worst rival forever. Maybe you can win us a Super Bowl real quick. I'm interested to see if that can happen. I'm interested to see if Rodgers can do it, right? Maybe he's that guy, maybe not. It'd be very fun and flashy and interesting and crazy if that announcement was made. He wants to win another Super Bowl. He could try to have the Brett Favre trajectory. If not, this could be it for Aaron Rodgers. We've seen him talk about careers in politics, and I'm sure he'd have some media presence if he retired now. So Aaron Rodgers is a guy that he's got other interests. He's got other things he wants to do. He could just retire. Could be it for him. Or he goes to the Vikings and makes a run to Super Bowl. I hope that happens just for the storyline perspective. I think it'd be super fun and interesting if Aaron Rodgers did that. That's the only fit. Minnesota is the only team for me that I feel like could bring on Aaron Rodgers, and that's the only team that I feel like he could want to go to himself. We'll see how that goes. We'll see how it plays out. If it's the Vikings, it's the Vikings. If it's not, it's retirement. But that's sort of my thoughts on some of the speculated on landing spots for Aaron Rodgers as he leaves New York. Okay, some quick housekeeping before we go. That's basically all I have. I want to just give some brief thoughts on some other games I watched this week. I want to do this segment in the mornings. I kind of go back and I like rewatch and I check the box scores and just I sleep on games, right? So Purdue will play tomorrow night. Watch the game, wake up in the morning, have the sleep to reset, and then look back at it again, see if I have a different angle of opinions. And then in that time, I watch some of the biggest games from the biggest sports nationally, right? And I want to kind of just touch on those games because I feel like I have interesting things to say about them. Within Indiana, we haven't really talked about Butler at all in this show just because they're not good. But they beat Georgetown 97-86 at home. That's a good home win in Hinkle. Pierre Brooks II had 30, great showing from him. Butler seems to be making some things happen, winning some games in the Big East. I'm excited to see how they kind of progress as we get into the Big East tournament area of the season. Butler beat Georgetown. Elsewhere in the Big East, number 9, St. John's. They held the fort down against 24 Creighton. I'm beginning to love St. John's. I might do a full segment about St. John's at some point in the season because I really think they're fun. They shoot the ball well. They play hard under Patino. They control the Big East. They have a 2-game lead now after a win over the number 2 team in Creighton. So that was a battle for the top of the Big East. St. John's wins. They now have a 2-game lead, right? Generational season for the Johnnies. They're probably going to win the Big East regular season title, although they still have some tough games moving forward in the schedule. They'll have a great chance to win the Big East tournament, and they'll also have a great chance, in my opinion, to go to the Final Four and potentially do more than that in the NCAA tournament. Love to see what they're doing. And women's basketball. I've been having some fun with some women's college basketball. I'm real excited about the Fever. I think they're going to be great. But I watched number 5 LSU go to number 3 Texas. Texas came back and won at home 65-58. They now control the SEC in women's basketball. They took down South Carolina, number 4, coming into the weekend before getting blown away at home by UConn. So Texas, they've beaten the other 2 top teams in the SEC in women's basketball. They're now at the top. They could win the SEC regular season title. They could be, they'll probably stay at number 3, but if Notre Dame loses tonight, they could be a top 2, maybe top 1 team in the AP poll. Texas is probably a 1 seed at this point, and that's very exciting and interesting to see sort of how the women's basketball tournament's going to go when we get to that point in March. I think that the Elite Eight is going to be outrageous. I think the top 10 of women's basketball is super competitive. And sure, NCAA women's basketball is known for not having too much parity, right? The top teams are the top teams. It's very top heavy. But when those top teams play each other at the end of the NCAA tournament, that's where things get crazy. And I'm personally very excited to watch that play out. I watched Texas beat LSU. I watched St. John's beat Creighton. I watched Butler beat Georgetown. Those were all very fun. We didn't talk about those games, but those are some things I'm monitoring, some teams I'm watching throughout the week. Looking ahead, Next episode is on Wednesday, so this episode will probably come out. I guess it depends on the audio version will probably come out by 3. I'm hoping that I can get shows in and uploaded by 1 on each day, right? So I'm hoping that by 1 p.m. Eastern, on every other weekday, right? This week it'll be Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Next week it'll be Tuesday, Thursday. I'm hoping that by then I can get episodes out. On Wednesday, we're going to talk about Purdue at MSU. Whatever happened, we'll talk about it. We'll preview Pacers-Grizzlies, an exciting home game. They play the Grizzlies again this year. We'll talk about Aaron Rodgers and the Colts a little bit more specifically, zoomed in. A lot more to do with Indiana and the sports world as a whole. Tonight, there's no games between teams in the state of Indiana, but USA plays Sweden in hockey. I'm going to watch Canada the second I'm done with this show. They're taking on Finland. Number 3, Duke in the men's goes to Virginia at 8 on ESPN. We get to see number 13 Duke go to number 2 Notre Dame on the women's side. That game's at 6 p.m. on ESPN, so a pair of Duke basketball games on ESPN tonight. Tomorrow night, big night. Purdue at Michigan State, 7 p.m. Peacock. Number 7 versus number 11. Those numbers will change the second this show comes out. Butler at Xavier, another unranked Big East clash. Opportunity for Butler to get a big road win. That game's at 8 p.m. on Peacock. Number 8, Texas A&M goes to Mississippi State, number 22. That's a game I'm watching, and the Champions League is on all day long. Got some exciting stuff going on. It's honestly a quiet week in the sports world, at least with the teams that we're interested in on this show, because it's the NBA All-Star break. The Pacers don't play till Thursday. IU is out all week until they play Purdue on Saturday. But Purdue-Michigan State, big-time game tomorrow night. Can Purdue stay in the Big Ten title race? We'll find out. We're going to have a lot to talk about regardless on Wednesday. It's been a while since we've done a show. It's good to be back. Again, Purdue game tomorrow night. That's the highlight of this first half of the week. We'll speak again on Wednesday. Thank you so much for listening to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. I appreciate you, especially if you're watching all the way to the end. And again, appreciate you wholeheartedly. Thank you very much, and I will see you all on Wednesday. We've got a lot to watch in between now and then.